In Jujutsukaisen, the Gojo clan has a long history that goes back over 1,000 years, but despite that, Satoru Gojo is the only one who gets any screen time. Because of this, it's easy to forget that the rest of his family even exists, which is why today I'll be explaining literally everything there is to know about them. Starting off 1,000 years ago, the origin of the Gojo clan can be traced back to a guy called Michizane Sugawara. According to Panda, Michizane was a big shot jujutsu sorcerer during the Heian era, which is the golden age where sorcerers and curses were stronger than at any other point in history. To be a big shot in those days means that Michizane must have been unbelievably powerful, and in JJK Volume 0, we got the reveal that both Gojo's family and Yuta's family are his descendants. This helps to explain why they each have nearly unlimited amounts of cursed energy, since their ancestor is genuinely one of the best sorcerers of all time. What makes this even crazier is that Michizane Sugawara was a real person who actually existed, and the story of his death ties in nicely to Jujutsukaisen. Born in the year 845, Michizane was acknowledged as a child genius who could read and write classical poetry. By his mid-20s, he easily passed the exams to become a government official, where he rose through the ranks faster than a normal person would. Thanks to his many talents, he earned the respect of Japan's Emperor Uda, who rapidly promoted Michizane into important jobs, including ambassador to China. However, many of the other nobles felt threatened by his success, and so in the 10th century, they falsely accused him of treason. By this point, Emperor Uda had retired and was replaced by his son, who was more than willing to banish Michizane from the capital. Over the next 2 years, he then went through hell before dying in the year 903. And after his death, this is when strange things began to happen. For example, one of the nobles who'd falsely accused him was struck by lightning and killed, while another one suddenly died of illness. On top of that, the politician who replaced Michizane passed away after falling in a swamp, and the emperor who banished him lost his son and grandson within a short period of time. In fact, on historical records, the cause of death for the emperor's son was implied to be the curse of Michizane, as they believed that his vengeful spirit was behind all the chaos. This is what brings us back to JJK, where we know that humans can turn into curses after death depending on the circumstance. In Michizane's case, he had unfinished business with the nobles who framed him, and since he wasn't killed with cursed energy, his soul was able to return as a special grade vengeful spirit. In this form, he became feared for causing natural disasters like floods and earthquakes, but his most well-known attack was lightning. On more than one occasion, lightning struck different people who betrayed him, and for that reason it's my personal theory that when Michizane was alive, he had fully mastered the limitless curse technique. Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen hinted that lightning can be a natural byproduct of hollow purple, and so if a sorcerer is skilled enough, they might be able to harness that lightning as an extension technique. An extension technique is when someone creatively uses their power in a way that deviates from its normal purpose, with one example being how Megumi created flying toads, and another example being how Nobara created those cursed energy grenades out of the nails. Given that Michizane is a legendary sorcerer with 30 years more experience than Gojo currently has, I say there's a decent chance that lightning could be one of many extension techniques that he derived from the Limitless. If this theory is correct, then it would also mean that Michizane had the Six Eyes, which is a quirk that enables you to see cursed energy on a microscopic level. Throughout history, only people from Gojo's bloodline have had this mutation, and according to the author, the Six Eyes is mandatory if you're using Limitless. Therefore, as Gojo's most famous and possibly most powerful ancestor, we can't ignore the possibility that they had the same curse technique, and if they did, then Michizane would have had the Six Eyes as well. Now, moving on to roughly a century after his death, this is when a new Six Eyes from the Gojo family appeared. Before we get into it though, I should warn you that from this moment we will be talking about spoilers from the manga, so if you don't want to know anything after season 2, then now is the time to hit that sub button and check out a different video on the channel. For everyone else, the first place we need to look is chapter 145, where we got some important information about Tengen. In case you don't know, Tengen is the immortal sorcerer who's been alive since before the Heian era even began, and she claimed that her destiny is directly connected to sorcerers who have the Six Eyes. To explain why, we need to understand her immortality curse technique, which is an ability that prevents her from dying but still allows her to get old. After 500 years of aging, her body began to evolve into something inhuman, and so to stop that evolution from happening, she reset her body by absorbing another person. The person she absorbed was referred to as the Star Plasma Vessel, and throughout the timeline there have been at least 3 different Star Plasma Vessels who were chosen to merge with Tengen. If we do the math, the most recent merger was supposed to happen in 2006, meaning the merger before that must have happened in the early 1500s, and the one before that was around the year 1000. This is where the Six Eyes comes in, because during that very first merger around the year 1000, it was the Six Eyes who saved the Star Plasma Vessel's life. The reason he had to do this is because at the time there was a mad scientist sorcerer called Kenjaku who desperately wanted to see what would happen if Tengen evolved. As a result, he tried to get rid of the Star Plasma Vessel, but Chapter 145 confirmed that Kenjaku was beaten by the Six Eyes, which allowed the first merger to take place. What's amazing though is that even though he was beaten, he somehow managed to avoid being killed by the Limitless. This gave Kenjaku the time he needed to rethink his plan, and for the next 500 years, he waited until Tengen had to merge for the second time. As a quick side note, Kenjaku is not immortal, but he has the ability to artificially extend his life thanks to his curse technique, which lets him take over people's bodies. Anyway, like I was saying, around the early 1500s, Tengen had gotten so old that she needed to do another merger, but Kenjaku had been plotting to make sure it wouldn't happen. On this occasion, he didn't want to take any chances, and so he somehow infiltrated the Gojo family and killed the Six Eyes less than 1 month after they were born. He did this to guarantee that they would never grow up to defeat him in the future, and then he took things a step further when he eliminated the baby Star Plasma Vessel. By doing all of this, it meant that when the day of Tengen's evolution arrived, there should have been nothing and no one who would have stopped it. However, almost like a miracle, on the day a new Six Eyes and new Star Plasma Vessel showed up, defeating Kenjaku once again and enabling the merger to happen. Based on the way Tengen described these events, my guess is that following the death of the original baby Six Eyes, a second Six Eyes was born shortly after, which the Gojo family kept a secret. Normally, this level of secretiveness isn't something they'd do, but considering how the first baby was assassinated, it makes sense why they'd use every trick imaginable to keep this next one under the radar. If this is the case, it'd perfectly explain why Kenjaku never knew that a new Six Eyes was around, because no one would have expected that another one would be born so soon. Remember, in the present day, Satoru was the first Six Eyes to appear in over 100 years, so clearly they don't show up very often. The fact that two would appear back to back is a miracle, like I said, and it's why Tengen believes that she's connected by fate to the Six Eyes and the Star Plasma Vessel. Now, moving on to the early 1600s, this was the beginning of the Edo period in Japan, which is an era that lasted for over 250 years. During this time, the Gojos had at least one more sorcerer who inherited the Limitless Curse technique, and the story of his death is pretty interesting. In a recent interview, it was revealed that if someone has the Limitless and Six Eyes, then they automatically become the head of the Gojo clan. And it was implied in the manga that the Zenin are the same, and that they choose their leader purely based on who has the 10 shadows. Back in the Edo period, this was the case in that both heads of the family had those curse techniques, and for some reason or the other, they got into a fight in front of the other nobles. The argument then ended up descending into a death match, and based on the hint that we got in chapter 117, to me it sounds like the leader of the Zenin realized he was going to lose, and so he decided to at least make sure that the head of the Gojo clan would die with him. That's why he used the 10 shadows to summon Maharaga, which is of course the one Shikigami that no Zenin has been able to control. Because it has the ability to adapt to literally anything, the only way Maharaga can be beaten is if you quickly destroy it with an attack that it's never seen. In that sense, the head of the Gojo clan had a chance of survival if he'd immediately used something like Hollow Purple, but sadly for him, he just wasn't able to get the win. As a result, both clan heads were killed in front of everyone, and ever since then, the Gojo and Zenin families have hated each other. This mutual hatred is something that's persevered all the way up until the modern day, and we've seen this with Naobito Zenin, who was the head of the Zenin clan. As in chapter 106, he didn't even care that Gojo was sealed, and he was kind of interested to see how the Gojo clan would decline in the wake of their leader disappearing. Speaking of the modern day, it's now finally time to talk about the current Six Eyes and the remaining members of his family. In 1989, the birth of Satoru Gojo changed the entire jujutsu world, with his existence forcing many curse users to go into hiding. At the same time, his curse energy was so overwhelming that cursed spirits began to get stronger in response, which is partly why special race spirits now appear way more frequently than they used to. According to the author, as a child, Satoru was treated like a king by the rest of the Gojo clan, but even at that young age, there were outside forces who wanted to kill him. Chapter 96 showed us that there was a bounty of over 100k for any assassin who could terminate Kid Gojo, but obviously that didn't end up happening. Then, when Satoru was 16, Tengen was on the verge of evolution, and so she desperately needed to merge with a new Star Plasma Vessel. The name of that new vessel was Riko Amanai, and Gojo's job was to defend her from any threats, just like his ancestors had done in the past. Ultimately though, he did fail in that mission, with Riko being murdered by Toji Fushiguro, who was an assassin without any cursed energy. Toji was hired to kill the girl by a wealthy religious organization, and it was explicitly confirmed in the manga that Kenjaku was secretly behind it. Rather than trying to kill the Star Platinum vessel himself, Kenjaku instead pulled the strings of this religious organization, which is why in this scene, it's revealed that the guy who Toji thought was the boss isn't actually the one in charge. Following on from that, with the Star Plasma vessel being dead, Tengen was forced to evolve, and she gradually morphed into this creature that was more of a cursed spirit than a human. This was good news for Kenjaku because about a decade later, he stole the body of Suguru Geto, and in the process gained the ability to manipulate cursed spirits. With this power, the villain had everything he needed to manipulate and experiment with Tengen even more, but before he could get to that, he wanted to get rid of Satoru. As we know, Kenjaku has a terrible track record when it comes to facing off against the Six Eyes, and in chapter 222, he just straight up admits that he'd die if he fought against Gojo. That's why instead of a fight, he decided to trap Satoru in the Prism Realm, which was a genius idea for one reason. In this series, only one living person is allowed to have the Six Eyes at any given time, so by trapping him in the Prism Realm forever, a new Six Eyes would never be born again. In that way, Kenjaku had learned from his mistakes 500 years earlier, and he was trying to guarantee that he'd never have to deal with a similar situation where a new Six Eyes appears after he's already killed one. Regardless, after Satoru was sealed, this is when we learn a little bit more about his relatives in the present day. In chapter 148, it was mentioned that there are people inside the Zenin clan who want to improve their relationship with the Gojo clan, proving that even with Satoru being gone, there are still living members who are active in the Gojo family. Later on, the Zenin clan is then basically wiped out with the exception of Maki and Megami, and when this happened, the Gojos made a formal request that the Zenins be removed from the big three families. What makes this funny is that at the time, the Gojo clan was incredibly weak themselves, with their leader being trapped inside the prison realm. During the Shibuya arc, the family were described as literally being a one-man team, so you'd think that when that man is out of the picture, they'd be a tiny bit more humble. One last thing to mention is that when Satoru was a kid, his relatives taught him how to use Falling Blossom Emotion, which is a special anti-domain technique that's only known by sorcerers in the big three clans. Anyhow, if you made it this far, then thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my other video, where I explained all the different curse techniques in the Zenin clan. Also, I'd appreciate if you liked and shared this video if you liked it, and until the next one, peace out!